My name is Father Elias. I am 34 years old, and for a long time, I wore this black cassock as a heavyweight rather than a blessing. Before the 14th of January, if I'm being honest with you, my faith felt like a beautiful but hollow shell. I loved the incense and the ancient chants, but I often felt like I was a museum curator for a God who had stopped speaking. I viewed Christianity as a set of rules and rituals to keep the world from falling apart, but I didn't truly know the fire behind the icons. I was exhausted by a world that seemed to have outgrown the gospel, and I had begun to fear that we were just lighting candles in a graveyard. I would stand before the altar every morning, going through the motions of the liturgy, wondering if my prayers were hitting the ceiling and falling back down like dust. I saw the people in the pews, some checking their watches, others lost in their own worries, and I felt like a failure because I couldn't give them the living water they didn't even know they were thirsty for. My heart was dry, brittle, and searching for a spark that I thought had gone out centuries ago. That all changed 12 days ago, on January 14th, 2026. I was in the small, dim room where I hear confessions. It is a space designed for mercy, a place where the air usually smells of old wood and the faint linger of beeswax. A woman I had known for years, a woman who helped clean the sanctuary and sang in our choir, sat behind the screen. She was someone I trusted, someone the whole congregation looked up to as a pillar of stability. But as she began to speak, the temperature in that small room dropped until I could see my own breath. Her voice didn't sound like her own. It was hollow, echoing with a metallic edge that made the hair on my arms stand up. She didn't start with a small sin or a lapse in judgment. She began to speak of a shadow world that had taken root right under my nose. She confessed that for the last year, she and others within the church had been practicing the occult. She spoke of blood covenants made in the dark, of rituals performed under the very roof where we celebrate the liturgy. She told me they had been using the holy space to invite entities of shadow, offering the spiritual safety of our children in exchange for worldly gain. She described how they would wait until the church was empty, using the silence of the sanctuary to chant names that were never meant to be spoken. They weren't just curious, they were intentional. They wanted power, they wanted wealth, and they were willing to sign away the protection of the innocent to get it. The spiritual filth I felt in that moment was so heavy, it felt like lead in my lungs. I felt a wave of nausea, so strong I had to grip the arms of my chair. It wasn't just the words she said, it was the presence that came with them. It felt as though the walls were bleeding darkness. My heart didn't just skip, it felt as though an invisible hand had crushed it. I tried to reach for my cross to say a prayer of exorcism, but my muscles refused to move. The weight of the air became impossible to breathe. I collapsed onto the floor, my eyes rolling back as the world of shadows claimed me. For 6 minutes, my heart stopped. The doctors would later call it a sudden, unexplained failure. But I know what it was. I was standing before the throne. The transition was not like falling asleep. It was like waking up from a dream you didn't know you were in. One moment I was on the cold floor of the confessional, and the next, I was standing in a realm of light that made the sun seem like a flickering candle. There was no floor, yet I was standing. There was no sun, yet everything was illuminated from within. The peace was so thick I could almost taste it, like honey and ozone. It was a place where time didn't exist, where every moment was now. And then I saw him. When I saw him, I didn't see a distant king or a painting. I saw life itself. It was as if every cell in my soul was finally plugged into its source. I felt a love that was terrifying in its intensity, a purity that burned away every lie I had ever told myself. I felt small, yet for the first time I felt truly seen. His eyes were like pools of fire that didn't burn but purified. He didn't look at me with anger, but with a sorrow that could move mountains. I fell to my knees, not because I was told to, but because it was the only thing that made sense in the presence of such perfection. My pride, my doubts, my boredom with the liturgy, all of it vanished like mist. I realized that the God I had been serving with cold rituals was a lion of infinite power and a lamb of infinite mercy. He reached out a hand, and as he touched my shoulder, I felt a surge of energy that felt like 1,000 years of sleep being washed away. He didn't need to use words the way we do. His thoughts were like melodies that reshaped my understanding of reality. He showed me the state of the world, not as a map, but as a living, breathing organism that was choking on its own darkness. I saw the earth from a great height, and it looked like a garden that had been neglected for far too long. I could see the prayers of the faithful rising up like thin pillars of smoke, but they were being drowned out by a thick, oily cloud of rebellion and hatred. This cloud wasn't natural. It was being fed by the very things the woman had confessed to me. "Elias," he said, and the sound of my name was like the roar of 1,000 waterfalls and the whisper of a mother combined. It resonated in the marrow of my bones. The salt has lost its flavor, and the shepherds have invited the wolves to the table. The altars are stained with blood that does not belong to me. As he spoke, the light around us shifted. He began to show me visions of churches all across the land. I saw magnificent cathedrals and humble storefront chapels, but many of them were hollow. I saw leaders standing behind pulpits speaking words of peace and prosperity, while underneath the floorboards there were nests of vipers. I saw how the occult had not just attacked the church from the outside, but had been invited in through the front door. Leaders were making secret deals, trading the truth of the gospel for the influence of the world. They were performing blessings that were actually curses, and the people in the pews were being led like sheep to a slaughterhouse. The vision deepened, and I saw the blood covenants the woman had mentioned. I saw people in high positions, doctors, lawyers, politicians, gathering in secret rooms to perform ceremonies that mocked the Eucharist. They were using the names of saints to mask the names of ancient, hungry spirits. They thought they were in control, that they were just using these forces to get ahead, but I saw the chains around their necks. They were slaves to the very things they thought they were commanding, and the worst part was that they were bringing this spiritual poison back into their homes, infecting their children and their communities. Jesus looked at me, and his face was filled with a grief that shattered my heart. "My people have traded their inheritance for a bowl of dust," he said. "They have forgotten that I am a consuming fire. They have made me into a decoration, a hobby, a way to feel good while they walk in the ways of death. But the earth can no longer carry the weight of this betrayal." As he spoke, the light around us shifted again, and the ground of that heavenly realm seemed to become transparent, like a sea of glass that allowed me to look down upon the world. Jesus stretched out his hand, pointing toward the North American continent, which glowed with a dim, flickering light that was being rapidly overtaken by patches of deep, oily purple. He focused my vision on the first of the 6 cities. I saw New York City, but it did not look like the city I had seen in photographs or on the news. I saw the spiritual architecture of Manhattan. The skyscrapers weren't just buildings of steel and glass. They were like jagged teeth reaching up to bite the sky. I saw thick, black cables of spiritual energy running beneath the streets, connecting the financial district to the media centers. These cables were pulsating with a heavy, rhythmic throb, like a heartbeat of greed and malice. Jesus showed me the boardrooms high above the clouds where men and women gathered. They weren't just discussing markets or money. I saw them standing around tables where blood had been spilled in secret. They were making covenants with ancient spirits of famine and war, trading the stability of the nation for a few more years of dominance. The most terrifying part of the vision of New York was the churches. I saw grand cathedrals with steeples that looked holy from the outside. But when Jesus adjusted my spiritual sight, I saw that the altars were hollow. Inside the hollow spaces beneath the altars, there were scrolls written in blood, containing the names of the congregants who had been offered up for the success of the ministry. The pastors stood in their expensive robes, smiling and speaking of love, but their shadows on the wall were shaped like wolves. They had invited the occult into the very heart of the sanctuary. I saw how they used the music and the atmosphere to put the people into a trance, making them vulnerable to the entities that were being called down during the service. The blessings they laid on the people's heads were actually marks of ownership by the shadow. New York has become a throne for the spirit of pride, Jesus said, and his voice felt like a weight upon my chest. They believe they are untouchable. They think their wealth is a shield, but they have built their house upon a foundation of bones. The blood of the innocent cries out from the concrete. Because they have rejected the light and made a covenant with the abyss is coming to claim its debt. Then the vision shifted westward to Los Angeles. Here, the darkness was different. It wasn't the heavy, industrial blackness of New York. It was a shimmering, deceptive violet. It looked like a beautiful mist from a distance, but as we drew closer, I realized it was a cloud of flies. I saw the entertainment industry as a massive web, with golden threads stretching out to every home in the world. Behind the cameras and the bright lights of the studios, I saw the same blood covenants. I saw actors and creators kneeling before altars of ash, begging for fame in exchange for the souls of the children who would watch their work. I saw how the churches in Los Angeles had become stages for a different kind of ritual. They had turned the gospel into a performance, a show that celebrated the self rather than the creator. The occult infiltration here was subtle, but deadly. They were teaching people that they were gods themselves, that they could manifest their own reality through their desires. This was the same lie told in the garden, and it was being chanted in worship centers across the city. I saw demonic entities standing behind the worship leaders, whispering lyrics into their ears that sounded like praise, but were actually invitations for the spirits of lust and delusion to enter the room. The people in the pews were glowing with a pale, sickly light. They were being drained of their spiritual life while they cheered for their success. I saw the blood covenants being made in the parking lots and the back offices of these megachurches, where leaders traded the protection of their flocks for the keys to earthly kingdoms. The air over Los Angeles was thick with the scent of rotting flowers and ozone. In Los Angeles, they have worshipped the image instead of the reality, Jesus told me. His eyes were focused on the vast sprawl of lights. They have turned my house into a den of sorcery. They use my name as a mask for the ancient goddesses of old. They have invited the spirits of deception to dance in the aisles. Because they have traded the truth for a lie, the darkness will show them the true face of the gods they have chosen. I felt a profound sense of suffocation. The beauty of the heavenly realm was the only thing keeping me from being completely overwhelmed by the horror of what I was seeing. I realized that the woman's confession in my small office was just a single drop in a vast, poisonous ocean. The church, which I had thought was a bastion of safety, was being used as a gateway for the very things it was supposed to fight. I saw the blood covenants clearly now. They weren't just metaphors. I saw the physical act of signing names in ledgers of skin. I saw the literal offering of the spiritual welfare of the next generation. These people were selling the future of their children to buy a few moments of comfort in the present. And they were doing it while singing hymns. They were doing it while holding Bibles. The hypocrisy was so sharp it felt like a blade in my side. Jesus turned to me, and the light of his presence intensified until the vision of the cities began to tremble. The shepherds have become hunters, he said. They have turned the sheepfold into a slaughterhouse. They think I do not see because I have been silent. They think my mercy is a sign of weakness, but the cup of my indignation is full. The 6 cities are the centers of this rebellion. They are the high places of the modern age. And because the infection is so deep, the cure must be radical. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. I saw the threads of destiny for millions of people tied to these cities. I saw people going about their daily lives, buying coffee, driving to work, planning their futures, completely unaware that the ground beneath them was spiritually hollowed out. I saw the faithful few who were still praying, but their voices were like small, dying embers in a hurricane. The warning must go out, Jesus said, and his voice shook the glass sea beneath us. The time for talking about reform is over. The time for escape has begun. The physical land has been promised to the darkness by those who claim to own it. Therefore, my people must leave the land. The vision shifted again, moving with the speed of thought away from the glittering, deceptive mists of the West Coast toward the heart of the country. We stood over Chicago. From this height, the city looked like a massive, sprawling grid of lights. But as the light of Jesus' presence pierced through the atmospheric layers, I saw the spiritual reality of the windy city. The wind that blew through those streets wasn't just air. It was a swirling vortex of voices. I heard the cries of the forgotten, the sounds of those who had been discarded by a society that valued utility over the soul. But beneath that, there was a deeper, more sinister sound. It was the sound of iron clashing against iron. In Chicago, the occult infiltration had taken a different form. It wasn't about the glamour of Los Angeles or the raw greed of New York. It was about the cold, calculated pursuit of power through the blood of the innocent. I saw the churches in the neighborhoods, many of them old, beautiful buildings with stained glass that once told the story of salvation. But now, those windows were like blind eyes. Inside, I saw blood covenants being made in the basements and vestries. I saw leaders from different denominations meeting in the dead of night, joining hands with those who practiced the ancient arts of destruction. They were binding the city, neighborhood by neighborhood, to entities that fed on violence and chaos. I saw a vision of a pulpit in a large, influential church. The pastor was a man of great eloquence, and thousands leaned on his every word. But as he spoke, I saw a black liquid, like thick oil, seeping from his mouth and onto the pews. This oil wasn't just a metaphor. It was a spiritual substance that coated the hearts of the listeners, making them numb to the truth and hungry for the very things that would destroy them. Underneath the floorboards of that sanctuary, I saw the blood covenants written on the skins of animals, hidden away in steel boxes. These leaders had promised the safety of their congregations to the spirits of the air in exchange for political influence and the protection of their property. They were lying to the people, telling them that the city was entering a new season of blessing, even as they were signing the warrants for the city's spiritual arrest. Chicago has become a forge for the weapons of the enemy, Jesus said, and his voice carried the grief of a father watching his children build their own gallows. They have used my name to sanctify their lust for control. They have turned the bread of life into a stone. The shepherds here have sold the sheep to the slaughter for a seat at the tables of men. Because they have made a pact with the spirit of murder, the 3 days of darkness will find them without a shield. The vision moved south, and the air became heavy with humidity and the scent of salt. Miami appeared below us. At first glance, it was a city of vibrant colors and endless celebration, but the spiritual reality was a suffocating blanket of gold and ash. Here, the blood covenants were tied to the pursuit of eternal youth and the worship of the body. I saw the beautiful beaches, but the sand was moving. When I looked closer, I realized the sand was made of tiny white fragments of bone, the spiritual remains of those who had sacrificed everything for a moment of pleasure. In Miami, the occult was not hidden at all. It was woven into the very fabric of the culture, even within the churches. I saw prophetic conferences where the leaders were actually using divination and tarot under the guise of the Holy Spirit. They were charging the poor for miracles that were actually temporary spells cast by entities of greed. I saw the blood covenants made in luxury high-rises where church leaders mingled with those who practiced Santeria and other dark traditions, blending the holy with the profane until the distinction was gone. They were sacrificing the spiritual purity of their youth, handing them over to the spirits of hedonism in exchange for the growth of their ministries. The churches in Miami were like brightly colored tombs. They were telling the people that God wanted them to have everything the world had to offer and more. They were lying about the nature of the cross, removing the blood of Christ and replacing it with the blood of the pact. I saw how these leaders had agreed to silence any mention of judgment or repentance in exchange for the favor of the city's elite. They were painting a picture of a God who was a servant to their desires, while the dark entities hovered over the steeples, waiting for the signal to descend. Miami has become a city of mirrors, Jesus told me, and his eyes were like fire as he looked at the coast. They see only themselves, even when they look toward heaven. Toward heaven, they have invited the spirits of the deep to rise and walk their streets. They have made a covenant with the waves of the abyss. Because they have worshipped the creature instead of the creator, the darkness will reveal the emptiness of their idols. I felt a sharp pain in my chest, a reflection of the agony Jesus felt for these cities. It wasn't just that they were sinning, it was that they were doing it in his name. The lying churches were the most heartbreaking part of the vision. These were the places where people should have been safe, where the truth should have been a lighthouse. Instead, the lighthouses had been seized by the enemy and were now being used to lure the ships onto the rocks. I saw a vision of a blood covenant ceremony. It wasn't a movie scene with hooded robes. It was a group of well-dressed men and women in a modern office sitting around a conference table. They were passing around a silver bowl, and as each person cut their finger and let a drop of blood fall into the bowl, they spoke a vow. They were vowing to keep the truth from the people, to maintain the image of the church at all costs, and to serve the entities that had promised them success. As the blood mixed, a dark winged creature manifested in the center of the room, its presence causing the very air to rot. These people didn't scream. They smiled. They felt powerful. They didn't realize that they were the first ones the creature would devour when the protection was lifted. Jesus turned his gaze back to me, and the intensity of his light was almost more than I could bear. The deception is so deep that only a total withdrawal of my hand will break the spell, he said. The 6 cities are the centers of the web. The infiltration is complete. My house has been turned into a marketplace for the souls of men. This is why the evacuation must be physical. The ground itself has been cursed by the blood of these covenants. When the 3 days of darkness come in February, the physical world and the spiritual world will collide in these locations. Those who have stayed behind, thinking they are safe in their lying churches, will find that their walls offer no protection against the entities they have secretly invited in. I saw the blood covenants again, but this time they looked like chains of fire wrapping around the city limits of Chicago and Miami. These chains were being pulled tight. I saw the people inside those chains, good people, honest people who were being lied to by their pastors. They were being told that everything was fine, that they should just keep giving and keep believing for a breakthrough. They had no idea that the breakthrough, being prepared, was a hole in the fabric of reality that would let the darkness through. Tell them to look past the words of men, Jesus commanded. Tell them to look at the fruit of their leaders. Do they preach the cross, or do they preach the self? Do they call for repentance, or do they call for more covenants? The time of the lying shepherd is ending. The fire of my presence will test every building and every heart. Those who are in the 6 cities must leave before the end of January. They must take their children and go to the quiet places, the forgotten places, where the ground has not been sold to the enemy. The weight of the message was crushing. I thought of my own small parish, of the woman who had confessed to me. I realized that the occult infiltration wasn't just in the big cities. It was a virus spreading everywhere. But the 6 cities were the epicenters. They were the heart, the brain, and the lungs of the rebellion. If they fell, the whole system would shake. The blood of the covenant is the only thing that matters, Jesus said. They must choose the blood of the Lamb, which was shed once for all, or the blood of the pact, which must be shed again and again to satisfy the hunger of the dark. There is no middle ground anymore. The darkness is coming to claim its own, and only those who have physically separated themselves from the land of the pact will be under my wing. The vision did not pause, for the urgency of the king would not allow a single moment of rest. We moved toward the coast again, but this time to the north, where the hills of San Francisco rose out of the Pacific like the jagged spine of a buried giant. From the heights of the heavenly realm, I saw the fog rolling in over the bay, but it wasn't the white, misty blanket I had seen in my youth. This fog was alive. It was a gray, swirling mass of confusion that clung to the streets and the buildings, seeping through the cracks in the doors and windows. Jesus showed me that this fog was a spiritual veil, a manifestation of the systematic rebellion against the very order of creation. In San Francisco, the occult infiltration was the most sophisticated I had seen. It wasn't just about rituals in basements. It was about the fundamental rewriting of reality itself. I saw the lying churches here, and they were the most deceptive of all. They had completely discarded the Word of God, replacing it with a new spirituality that sounded like compassion but was actually the oldest form of witchcraft. I saw leaders standing in pews that were draped in the colors of the world, telling the people that there was no such thing as sin, that they could redefine their own nature and that the God of the Bible was just an old story. Underneath these inclusive sanctuaries, I saw the blood covenants. They were signed in the name of freedom and liberty, but the spiritual reality was a trap of iron. I saw a vision of a high-tech laboratory in the city where men and women were working to merge the human soul with the machine. Behind them, standing in the shadows, were the same dark entities I had seen in the other cities. These people thought they were reaching for the next stage of evolution, but they were actually making a blood covenant with the spirit of the abyss. They were offering up the very essence of what it means to be human in exchange for the promise of a digital immortality that would never come. The churches in the city were cheering this on, calling it a new revelation of the divine, while the entities laughed. San Francisco has tried to unmake what I have made, Jesus said, and his voice was like a thunderclap that echoed across the hills. They have called the darkness light and the light darkness. They have turned my house into a laboratory of rebellion. Because they have tried to erase my image from the earth, the 3 days of darkness will erase the illusions they have built. The fog they have hidden behind will become a wall of stone. Finally, we stood over Las Vegas. It was a desert of neon, a glittering jewel in the middle of a vast, empty wilderness. But as I looked through the eyes of the Spirit, the neon lights faded, and I saw the city as a massive, hollow pit. The desert wasn't just sand, it was a graveyard of broken promises and discarded souls. In Las Vegas, the blood covenants were as common as the air. Every casino, every bright room where people chased the ghost of chance was built on a foundation of spiritual debt. I saw the churches in Las Vegas, and they were the most tragic of all. They had become like the casinos they lived next to. They were selling spiritual luck, telling the people that if they gave enough, if they believed hard enough, they would hit the jackpot of divine favor. They were making blood covenants with the spirits of mammon, trading the holiness of the sanctuary for a piece of the city's excess. I saw how the leaders here had agreed to ignore the sin city around them in exchange for a seat at the tables of the powerful. They were lying to the people, telling them that God was doing a new thing in the desert, while the ground was literally cracking open beneath their feet to reveal the hunger of the entities waiting below. I saw a vision of the tunnels beneath the Las Vegas Strip. They were filled with the blood of the pact, the spiritual residue of every life that had been destroyed by the city's hunger. The blood covenants here were made with the spirit of waste. People were offering up their families, their futures, and their sanity for a moment of thrill. And the churches were providing the blessings for these sacrifices. I saw a pastor standing on a stage, surrounded by gold and lights, telling his people that their risks were signs of faith, while the entities of the pit stood right next to him, collecting the names of those who were being led astray. Las Vegas is a city of ash painted in gold, Jesus told me. His presence was so intense now that I felt as though I would be consumed by it. They have worshipped the spirit of chance, forgetting that I am the Lord of the harvest. They have made my house a den of thieves. Because they have celebrated the void is coming to meet them. The lights of their city will provide no warmth when the supernatural cold of February descends. As the visions of the 6 cities concluded, Jesus showed me what the 3 days of darkness would physically feel like for those who remained. It wasn't just a lack of light, it was a weight. I saw the darkness descending like a thick black velvet that felt like it was pressing the air out of the lungs. I saw people trying to light candles, but the flames would not catch. I saw them trying to turn on flashlights, but the batteries would drain in an instant. This darkness was an active, aggressive force. It was the physical manifestation of the entities that had been invited through the blood covenants. I saw the entities moving through the streets of these 6 cities during those 3 days. They weren't just shadows, they were solid. They had claws and eyes that glowed with a sickly, pale fire. They were drawn to the places where the blood covenants had been made. They went to the lying churches first, for those were the places that had been promised to them by the leaders. I saw the horror on the faces of the people who realized too late that their pastors had lied to them, that their rituals had offered no protection, and that they were now face to face with the things they had been told did not exist. The physical world is a thin veil, Jesus said, and I saw him reach out and pull back a corner of the sky as if it were a curtain. When the protection of my hand is withdrawn on January 31st, 2026, the veil will be torn. The 6 cities are the places where the tier is already the widest. Those who remain will be standing in a place where the rules of the physical world no longer apply. Gravity will fail. The air will turn to poison. The very buildings will scream with the voices of those who were sacrificed in secret. I saw the evacuations in my vision. I saw people who were listening to the warnings, many of them through messages like this one. They were being mocked by their neighbors. Their pastors were calling them fearmongers and telling them they lacked faith. But these people were packing their cars anyway. They were leaving their jobs, their schools, and their comfortable lives. They were heading toward the mountains, the small towns, and the places where the ground was still humble. As they crossed the city limits, I saw a mark of light being placed on their foreheads. It was the only thing that would protect them from what was coming. Tell them that the evacuation must be physical, Jesus repeated, and the authority in his voice was absolute. They cannot stay in the path of the storm and expect my grace to shield them from a judgment they have been warned to flee. I am giving them the days until the end of January to move their bodies and their souls. If they choose to stay because they love their houses more than my voice, they will share the fate of the houses. I saw the blood covenants again, but this time they were like massive, invisible anchors holding the cities down as the darkness approached. These anchors were being pulled into the earth by the entities of the abyss. The only way to be free was to cut the rope and run. I saw the lying churches trying to hold the people back, telling them that God is everywhere and that you don't need to fear. But these leaders were just trying to keep their own power until the very last second. The time for the lie is over, Jesus said. The 3 days of darkness will be the final truth. It will be the moment when every person in those cities realizes that the spiritual world is more real than the concrete they walk upon. But for many, the realization will come too late. The vision then expanded beyond the boundaries of the cities, stretching out like a vast tapestry of fire and shadow. I saw the spiritual mechanics of what was happening, and it was far more terrifying than any natural disaster. Jesus showed me that the universe operates on laws of holiness and authority, and that these 6 cities had essentially been leased to the abyss by those who claim to be their spiritual guardians. The blood covenants weren't just the mistakes of a few individuals. They were legal contracts in the spirit realm, signed by leaders who had traded the protection of the Almighty for the temporary power of the shadow. I saw a vision of the atmosphere over these cities after the sun sets on January 31st, 2026. It looked like a massive, invisible dome being lowered over the city limits. This dome was not made of glass or steel, but of a spiritual silence. Once that deadline passes, the prayers rising from within those 6 cities will no longer reach the heights. It was as if the line had been cut. Jesus showed me that because the leaders had officially invited other entities to rule, he was honoring their choice by withdrawing his presence. I will not stay where I am mocked and sold, he told me, and the sorrow in his voice was like a knife. I am a gentleman. I go where I am invited, and I leave when I am pushed out by those who prefer the dark. Then he showed me what the 3 days of darkness would look like from the inside. This vision was so intense, I felt my spiritual form trembling. I saw a man in New York sitting in his apartment on a Tuesday in February. Suddenly, the sun did not set. It simply vanished. It wasn't an eclipse. It was as if the sun had been extinguished like a candle. He reached for his phone to check the news, but the screen was dead. Not just off, but dead, as if the very idea of electricity had been erased. He tried to flip the light switch, but nothing happened. He struck a match, and for a second, a tiny flame appeared, but it didn't cast any light. It stayed a small, orange point, unable to push back the blackness that was pressing against his eyes. I saw the entities entering his room. They didn't need to open the door. They moved through the darkness as if they were made of it. I saw their faces, twisted, ancient things that had been waiting since the dawn of time to taste the physical world again. They weren't there to kill him quickly. They were there to feed on his terror. And the most horrific part was that this man had been a regular at one of the lying churches. He had been told that he was anointed and destined for greatness. But as he stood in that supernatural dark, he realized his pastor had given him a wooden sword for a war of fire. The lying churches are the greatest traps of all, Jesus said, and I saw a vision of a massive cathedral in Chicago. During the 3 days of darkness, thousands of people ran to this church, thinking it would be a sanctuary. They hammered on the doors, begging to be let in. But when the doors opened, they didn't find the light of God. They found that the blood covenants the leaders had made had turned the church into a cage. The entities were already inside, sitting in the pews, waiting for the people to arrive. The pastors were there too, but they were no longer preaching. They were cowering behind the altars they had defiled, realizing that the spirits they had made deals with didn't care about their titles or their bank accounts. I saw a vision of the blood covenants as physical objects. They looked like scrolls made of human history and stained with a dark, pulsing liquid. Each scroll represented a deal made by a church leader or a city official. In exchange for growth, influence, or wealth, they had promised the spiritual rights to the city's children, the city's peace, and the city's future. Jesus showed me that these scrolls are why the evacuation must be physical. The land is under contract, he explained. When you stay on land that has been sold to the enemy, you are choosing to stay in a house that is marked for demolition. I am calling my people out so that the contract does not claim them along with the dirt. I saw the true remnant during this time. These were the people who had listened. I saw a family in a small farmhouse in the Midwest, far from the 6 cities. They had very little, just some food, some water, and their Bibles. When the darkness hit the world in February, their small home began to glow with a soft golden light. It wasn't electric light, it was the light of the presence of God. The entities of the dark would approach their windows, but they couldn't get close. It was as if there was a wall of fire surrounding the property. The children were not afraid. They were singing hymns, and their voices sounded like the music I had heard in the heavenly realm. This is the difference, Jesus said, pointing to the glowing farmhouse. These are the ones who did not make a covenant with the world. They made a covenant with me through the blood of the Lamb. They obeyed the warning. They moved their bodies and their lives out of the centers of rebellion. Because they honored my word, I will honor their safety. But the people in the 6 cities are choosing to stand on ground that belongs to the abyss. I saw a vision of the lying churches trying to explain away the signs before the end of January. I saw a group of famous pastors on a television set, laughing and telling their viewers that God is moving in a powerful way and that the rumors of judgment are just fear-mongering. They were using beautiful words to keep the people from leaving, because if the people left, the money would stop. I saw the blood of the pact dripping from their hands as they spoke. They knew the truth. They had felt the darkness coming, but they were more afraid of losing their earthly kingdoms than they were of the King of Kings. Their blood is on the hands of the shepherds, Jesus said, and his voice was so heavy with righteous anger that the vision of the television set shattered like glass. They have led my people into the mouth of the wolf for the sake of a few pieces of silver. They tell them they are safe while the sky is turning to ash. This is why you must speak, Elias. You must tell them that their safety is not in their church buildings or their pastors' words, but in their own feet, moving out of those cities. I saw a vision of the supernatural manifestations that would precede the 3 days. I saw the water in the pipes of New York and Los Angeles turning a dark rust color that smelled like old copper. I saw the mirrors in people's homes reflecting things that weren't there, shadows that moved even when the person was still. I saw animals, dogs, cats, and birds fleeing the 6 cities in massive waves. They knew. The natural world was responding to the shift in the spiritual atmosphere. The people, however, were being kept in a trance by the lying churches, told that these were just atmospheric anomalies or coincidences. The earth is screaming, Jesus told me. The rocks and the trees know that the master of the house is withdrawing his hand from those 6 places. Only man, in his pride and his reliance on his own knowledge, remains blind. They think they can solve the darkness with a better plan or a new law. They do not realize that the darkness is not a problem to be solved, but a judgment to be endured. I saw a vision of the blood covenants being torn open during the 3 days of darkness in February. When the scrolls were opened, the spirits attached to them were released in their full power. In Miami and Las Vegas, the entities of lust and greed took on physical forms that were so hideous, they would cause a heart to stop just by looking at them. I saw them walking through the luxury hotels and the worship centers, claiming every person who had the mark of the pact on their soul. The people who had stayed, thinking they were saved because they went to a lying church, found that the entities didn't recognize their prayers. They only recognized the blood they had used to sign the deals. You must tell them that the time for playing church is over, Jesus said. The line has been drawn in the sand. On January 31st, 2026, the gate will close. Those who are on the wrong side of that gate will experience the full weight of the choice they have made. I take no pleasure in this. I have sent warning after warning. I have sent my spirit to nudge their hearts. I am even using you, a man who is dead, to bring this final word. If they do not listen now, there is nothing left but the dark. I saw the evacuation again. I saw a young mother in San Francisco. She was hearing this message, and she felt the truth of it in her spirit. She looked at her 2 children, and then she looked at her beautiful apartment. She had worked so hard for it. Her pastor told her that God wanted her to be a light in the city, and that she shouldn't leave. But she felt the coldness of the fog outside, and she knew. She packed a single bag, took her children, and walked away from everything she owned. As she crossed the Golden Gate Bridge, I saw the angels of heaven cheering for her. She was a refugee of the Spirit, and she was safe. One soul is worth more than all the skyscrapers in New York, Jesus said softly. I will move heaven and earth to save one person who will listen, but I will not force them to leave. The choice is theirs. The land is sold, the contract is signed, the darkness is coming. Tell them to run. The vision moved deeper into the mechanics of the spirit world, showing me that the physical departure from these 6 cities was only the first step. Jesus showed me a long line of cars leaving Chicago, stretching out into the snowy plains. But as he adjusted my sight, I saw that some of the cars were glowing with a soft, protective light, while others were followed by long, shadowy ribbons that stretched back into the city like umbilical cords. Even in their flight, some are still tied to the pact, he told me. His voice was like the sound of a deep bell ringing in the quiet of night. They leave the city with their bodies, but they carry the city's gods in their suitcases. They carry the love of money, the addiction to the images of the world, and the pride of their own strength. If they do not cut these cords, the darkness will find them wherever they go. The evacuation must be a pruning of the soul, not just a change of address. I saw a vision of the lying churches in their final moments before the January 31st, 2026 deadline. I saw a massive sanctuary in Los Angeles, filled with thousands of people. The worship team was singing about new beginnings and unlimited favor. But behind the singer, I saw a massive spider-like entity sitting on the rafters, spinning a web over the congregation. Every time the singer mentioned prosperity without mentioning the cross, the web grew thicker. The blood covenants made by the leaders had given this entity the right to trap the souls of everyone in that room. These people were being prepared as a feast for the 3 days of darkness in February. They were being told they were climbing higher, while they were actually being led into a pit. I saw the pastors of these churches meeting in back rooms. They weren't praying, they were looking at spreadsheets and bank accounts. They were talking about how to manage the narrative of the rumors of judgment. They had felt the shift in the air, the same cold wind that had collapsed my heart in the confessional on January 14th, 2026. They knew something was wrong, but they had made their blood covenants years ago. They had traded their spiritual discernment for the ability to build massive empires. Now they were stuck. They couldn't tell the people to leave because that would mean admitting they had been wrong. It would mean the end of their prestige. So they continued to lie. The shepherd who stays for the sake of his own glory is a thief, Jesus said, And I saw his eyes flash with a holy fire that made the very air of heaven vibrate. They have stolen the safety of my children to pave their own path. In February, when the darkness has no mercy, these leaders will try to use my name to command the shadows, but the shadows will laugh. The entities will say, "We know the blood you signed with, and it was not the blood of the king." I saw a vision of the 3 days of darkness as a collision of dimensions. It wasn't just that it got dark. It was as if the rules of our world were being unwritten. In the 6 cities, I saw the walls of houses becoming transparent, but not to the physical eye, to the spiritual eye. People could see the entities walking through their living rooms. I saw the ground becoming soft like water, and the water in the harbors rising up like solid walls. Time itself seemed to stretch and break. For those inside the 6 cities, those 3 days will feel like 1,000 years of isolation and terror. It is a foretaste of the outer darkness where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth. I saw the blood of the pact being claimed. In Miami, I saw a beautiful woman who had spent her life worshiping her own reflection. She had attended a church that told her God wanted her to be a queen of this world. During the darkness, her mirror didn't show her face. It showed the entity she had made a covenant with through her vanity. The creature reached out from the glass and touched her, and I saw her soul wither like a leaf in a fire. She had no spiritual armor because her lying church had told her that armor was unnecessary for someone with her level of favor. They have been fed on candy and air, Jesus said, and his sadness was so profound I felt it as a physical weight in my own chest. When they needed the meat of the word and the shield of faith, they found they had nothing but empty stories and the lies of men who wanted their money. This is why the physical evacuation is a mercy. It is the only thing loud enough to wake them from the trance of the lying shepherds. I saw a vision of the mark again. As people crossed the boundaries of the 6 cities before the January 31st, 2026 deadline, an angel stood at the spiritual border. If a person left with a heart of repentance, the angel would touch their forehead with a coal of fire, leaving a seal that was invisible to humans but looked like a sun to the demonic entities. But if a person left only out of fear, still clutching their blood covenants with the world, the angel would step aside and the shadowy umbilical cord would remain attached. The heart must flee as fast as the feet, Jesus told me. They must leave behind the occult practices they have ignored in their pews. They must repent of the blood covenants they have made with their own greed and their own lust. The 3 days of darkness in February will be a sieve. It will shake everything that can be shaken, and only that which is built on the rock will remain standing. I saw a vision of the safe places, the small towns and rural areas where the people were gathering. These weren't survivalist camps filled with weapons. They were places of prayer. I saw a group of people in a small town in the mountains. They had welcomed the refugees from the cities. They were sharing their bread and their blankets. When the darkness hit in February, these towns were like islands of light in a sea of ink. The entities of the air circled these towns, screaming in frustration, but they couldn't enter. The air was too thick with the presence of God. The humble land will protect the humble heart, Jesus said. I have chosen the weak things of the world to shame the strong. The great cities, the seats of power and occult wisdom will fall into the dark, but the quiet places where my name is still feared and my word is still cherished will be the wombs of the new thing I am doing. Tell them, Elias, do not look back. Do not be like Lot's wife, longing for the comforts of the burning city. Look forward to the light that never fails. I saw a vision of the blood covenants being revoked. I saw a man who had been part of an occult circle within a large church in New York. He heard this warning and he fell on his face in tears. He cried out for the blood of Jesus to wash away the blood of the pact he had signed. As he prayed, I saw the dark scroll with his name on it burst into flames in the spirit realm. The umbilical cord that tied him to the city snapped. He was free. He grabbed his family and left for the countryside. This is the power of the gospel, even in these final hours. My mercy is still a door that is open, Jesus said, and his face shone with a hope that defied the coming storm. But that door is located outside the gates of the 6 cities. To find the door of my mercy, they must first leave the gates of the rebellion. The deadline is set. The entities are prepared. The darkness is hungry, but my heart is still beating for the one who will listen. I saw the lying churches one last time in this vision. I saw the steeples of the churches in the 6 cities beginning to crack. It wasn't an earthquake of the earth, but an earthquake of the spirit. The foundations built on blood covenants and the lies of men were giving way. The entities were no longer hiding in the basements. They were sitting on the altars, waiting for the sun to go down on January 31st, 2026. The time of the great revealing is here, Jesus said. No more masks, no more games, only the light and the dark. Tell them to choose the light while there is still a sun in the sky. The vision expanded one final time, moving beyond the borders of the 6 cities until I saw the entire globe laid out like a map of light and shadow. Jesus showed me that what is about to happen in America is not an isolated event. It is a signal to the rest of the world. The 6 cities, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Miami, San Francisco, and Las Vegas, are like the main pillars of a grand worldly house. When those pillars are touched by the 3 days of darkness in February, the entire structure of the world will begin to groan. I saw how the international markets, the systems of travel, and the very flow of global information are tied to the blood covenants made in these cities. When the darkness falls, the false gods of the world will be exposed as hollow. I saw people in far-off nations watching their screens as the news of the darkness in America began to spread. They will see the reports of the atmospheric shifts, the failure of technology, and the strange behavior of the natural world. But then the screens will go dark. I saw a vision of the global silence that will follow. For 3 days, the world will be forced to sit in a terrifying stillness. They will realize that their inventions, their weapons, and their wealth cannot stop what has been set in motion by the spiritual rebellion. The lying churches across the world will also face their moment of truth, as the members see that the prosperity and comfort they were promised offer no protection against a supernatural judge. Jesus showed me that the occult infiltration I witnessed in my own small parish is a global plague. In every nation, there are blood covenants being made in secret rooms, trading the souls of the people for a moment of power. But the 6 American cities have been the most blatant, the most proud in their rebellion. They have been the fountain from which the world drank its poison, Jesus said, and his voice carried the weight of the whole world's history. Therefore, the cleansing must begin with them. When the darkness claims the icons of human achievement, the rest of the earth will know that the time of the harvest has arrived. I saw a vision of the true shepherds who would rise up during this time. They weren't the men with the biggest platforms or the most expensive suits. I saw a grandmother in a small village, a young man who had spent his life working in a factory, and a quiet priest who had never been noticed by his bishops. These people had one thing in common. They had kept their lamps trimmed. They had rejected the blood of the pact and stayed faithful to the blood of the Lamb. During the 3 days of darkness in February, these humble believers became sources of supernatural direction. I saw them laying hands on the sick and they were healed. I saw them multiplying their bread to feed the refugees. I saw them standing against the entities of the dark with nothing but the name of Jesus, and the entities fled in terror. Leadership in my kingdom is not about the crown you wear on earth, but the cross you carry in the secret place, Jesus told me. He showed me that the lying churches would crumble during the darkness, their buildings becoming homes for the very spirits they had invited in. But the invisible church, the one made of humble, obedient hearts, would shine brighter than the sun. He told me that those who evacuate the 6 cities by January 31st, 2026 will be the ones who will lead the next movement of the Spirit. They will be the ones who carry the true light into the wreckage of the world. I saw the 3 days of darkness ending. When the light finally returns in February, the world will not look the same. The 6 cities will be like ghost towns, inhabited only by those who could not or would not leave. The spiritual atmosphere will be forever changed. The veil between the physical and the supernatural will remain thin, and humanity will finally understand that we do not live in a world of mere matter, but in a world of spirit. The blood covenants will have been paid for in the most horrific way possible, and the remaining people will have a choice: to repent and return to the ancient paths, or to harden their hearts even further. Jesus then turned his gaze fully upon me. The intensity of his love was almost unbearable, a fire that wanted to consume everything in me that wasn't true. "Elias, you are returning to a world that is asleep," he said. "Many will hear your words and call you a madman. Many will say that you are trying to frighten the people for your own gain. But the blood of those who stay in the 6 cities will be on your hands if you do not speak the warning clearly. You have seen the covenants. You have seen the lying shepherds. You have seen the entities that are waiting for the sunset of January 31st. Tell them that my mercy is found in the flight. Tell them that their physical movement is a sign of their spiritual surrender." He showed me my own body again, lying on the floor of the church. I saw the parishioners gathered around me, weeping, and the paramedics trying to restart my heart. I didn't want to go back. I wanted to stay in that light, in that peace where the lies of the world could never reach me. But he placed his hand over my heart, and I felt a pulse of life that was stronger than the death I had just experienced. "Go," he whispered. "Tell them that the king is coming, but the judge arrives first." The brilliant light that had surrounded me began to dim, and I felt the crushing weight of physical reality pressing in around me. My spirit was being compressed back into flesh and bone, back into a world where spiritual truths were mocked and divine warnings were dismissed as delusion. The smell of incense and the sound of my own gasping breath filled my senses. I felt the cold floor beneath me and the stinging heat of the paddles on my chest. I opened my eyes, and the dim light of the church felt like needles. But I carried with me something that could not be taken away: the absolute certainty of what I had seen, the undeniable reality of the judgment that was coming, and the urgent mission that had been entrusted to me. Whether people believed or mocked, whether they fled or remained, whether they prepared their hearts or hardened them further, I had been commanded to deliver this message faithfully. The vision ended as suddenly as it had begun, and I found myself gasping for breath, my heart pounding as life returned to my physical form. But the words of Jesus continued to echo in my consciousness, driving me forward with an urgency that would not be silenced. Time is running out. The cities must be evacuated. The 3 days of darkness are coming, and the choice that will determine eternal destinies must be made now, while mercy still remains available to those who will receive it. Thank you for staying until the end. If you are hearing this, know that timing matters. This message reached you for a reason, because something in you was ready to listen. If you feel prompted, write in the comments where you are listening from as a simple sign of response. And if you feel led, share this video with a few people close to you. Not everyone hears the call at the same time. We are entering a season that requires deeper roots and clearer discernment.